What if heaven whispered, "This is it, your final 24 hours in this season"? Would your heart start racing? Would memories of things left undone rush to the surface? What would you change, say, release, or finally step into if you knew time was folding in on itself? God's chosen one, this moment is no accident. You didn't stumble across this message by chance. You were summoned. Something sacred is happening right now. A shift, a countdown, a final call echoing through the spirit realm, reaching for the ones who still have time to respond before everything changes. And you're on heaven's radar. You're down to the last 24 hours of this spiritual season. That's not just poetic, it's prophetic. You may not see the full picture yet, but something has already begun moving behind the veil. Doors are groaning, cycles are closing, angelic hands are repositioning you for what's next. Can you feel it? That inner stirring, that divine urgency pressing on your soul. Don't ignore it. This is a holy warning wrapped in mercy, not fear. Comment 777 below if your spirit is already bearing witness to this word, if something inside you knows that this message was tailor-made for you. And to those of you who've been supporting this ministry through super thanks from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. Your faith and generosity are not only seen by us, but by God Himself, who promises to reward those who sow into what's sacred. But now, lean in closer, because what's coming next is not just a message, it's a revelation, one that could unlock what's been delayed, one that could explain why you've been hidden, pressed, stretched, and tested so intensely. The countdown isn't just symbolic. Heaven has truly marked this hour for awakening. Let's go deeper, chosen one. The last 24 hours of this season are not just about what's ending, but what's finally about to begin. God's chosen ones, you're down to the last 24 hours of this season. Chosen one, still yourself for a moment, not just to hear, but to perceive. Let your spirit lean in. You've walked through a season of silent trials, spiritual weight, and private pain. And now, what if the next 24 hours are not random, but divinely appointed as your final stretch in this wilderness? How differently would you live them if you knew that what's coming next depends on how you carry these last steps? This has been a chapter where darkness tried to define you, whispers of failure, repeated setbacks, and lonely nights that seem to have no end. But heaven has always told a different story about you. What looked like destruction was, in truth, construction. Not everything sent to break you succeeded because God never removed His hand. You were not being ruined, you were being refined. The betrayal, the silence, the delay, none of it was wasted. When I think back to one of the hardest times in my own life, a time when I lost almost everything I thought defined me, I remember asking God, why now? Why all at once? And in that silence, I began to see that what I thought was collapse was really clearance. God was removing what couldn't go with me into the next season. And perhaps that's what He's been doing for you too. Scripture confirms this pattern. In Isaiah 54, it says, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." Not because they don't hurt, not because they never launch, but because God Himself has already ruled their outcome. You may have felt every blow, but none of it has defined your destiny. And when you look around and realize you're still standing, it's not just survival, it's prophecy fulfilled. The enemy has escalated the warfare against your mind and identity for a reason. The lies have become louder. The pressure has become heavier. Why now? Because your divine unveiling is near. The true you, the one created in the image of heaven's authority, is about to step into the light. Remember when Jesus was baptized and affirmed by the Father? Immediately after, he was led into the wilderness, not because he sinned, but because the preparation precedes the mission. You may have been feeling more misunderstood, more misjudged, even by those closest to you. But so did Hannah in the Bible. While she prayed in agony for a child, the priest thought she was drunk. Yet from that pain came Samuel, a prophet who would anoint kings. That's the level of purpose God can bring from your tears. Even in today's world, there are people whose transformation only made sense in hindsight. Take Tyler Perry, for example. He was once homeless, rejected, laughed at, and ignored. Yet the same streets he once slept on, he now drives through as a visionary who owns one of the largest film studios in America. His pain didn't break him, it birthed him. And though your story may not look like his, the principle is the same. Pain is often the womb of purpose. When Moses stood before the Red Sea, with the Egyptian army closing in behind, it wasn't a sign of failure. It was the setup for one of the greatest deliverances in biblical history. That story is not just history, it's a spiritual pattern. Pressure, then parting. Chaos, then crossing. Confusion, then clarity. These last 24 hours of your current spiritual season are not ordinary. They are charged with divine weight. You've already wept, struggled, and endured more than you speak of. But now you stand at the threshold, and it matters what you carry forward. Will you take with you the bitterness of betrayal or the lessons forged in fire? Will you step into the next place with fear or with faith made bold by survival? There's something sacred about the end of a chapter. It is not a time for panic, but for reflection. If this truly were the final day in this season, how would you honor it? Not with haste, but with intentional release. Not with regret, but with reverence for all that it taught you. Chosen one, your emergence isn't a maybe. It's a matter of divine timing. And this time, you won't enter crawling. You'll enter crowned. Take a breath, chosen one, not just with your lungs, but with your soul. Pause for a moment and let this question echo through your spirit. What would truly shift inside you if you knew you were standing in the final 24 hours of this wilderness season? Would you still silence your truth to keep the peace? Would you still dim your worth so others don't feel small beside your light? Or would you finally speak like Esther before the king, knowing your words could change the destiny of a generation? Understand this clearly. The reason this season is nearing its end isn't because your enemies surrendered, nor because the chaos quieted. It's ending because you changed. Something invisible but holy began to rearrange deep within you. It wasn't your location that transformed, it was your spirit. You didn't need external validation. God saw the internal surrender. Something sacred shifted, a divine cracking open of the shell you once wore to survive. The version of you that used to bow under fear, that wore anxiety like a cloak, that mistook people-pleasing for humility, that version has been slowly dissolving in the fire of becoming. You're not the same person who stepped into this season. That former version of you tolerated being overlooked. It settled for the back seat, thinking that shrinking was somehow spiritual. But look at you now. You're rising, chosen one. Like Job, who declared, "When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold." You've endured the refining flames, and now something unshakable is being revealed. The fire didn't consume you. It revealed the gold in you. Can you feel that subtle, undeniable shift? That quiet boldness taking root in your voice? The one who used to let fear govern every decision is no longer present. The one who accepted crumbs when God called you to feast has been buried under the ashes of your past struggles. In that sacred burial ground of suffering and solitude, the real you was born, the warrior, the one who doesn't flinch in darkness because you learned how to fight in silence. The one who doesn't need applause because you were promoted in private. Think about Elijah. When he hid in the cave, it wasn't the earthquake, nor the fire, nor the wind that God used to speak. It was the still, small voice. And that's how your transformation happened too, not on stages or with spotlight, but in secret places, alone, in the kind of isolation that doesn't destroy, it refines. Every unseen tear, every unanswered prayer, every silent scream, they became weapons in the hands of God. What you thought was your breaking point was really your building place. Now, here you stand, in the final moments of this spiritual chapter, and the air around you feels different. Why? Because the old cannot hold the new. The patterns that once trapped you can no longer contain you. The warfare that once confused you has no access to this upgraded version of you. The chains that used to bind you now fall powerless at your feet. Just like Paul and Silas in that prison, what used to confine them became the very setting for their breakthrough. And so it is with you. The version of you that could be manipulated, overlooked, underestimated, that version is gone. What remains now is someone the enemy cannot manage, someone hell never wanted to see rise. Can you imagine what would happen if you walked into today like tomorrow carries divine authority with your name on it? What conversations would you initiate? What old habits would finally fall away like dead skin? These final hours are not just the closing of a cycle. They are a divine unveiling, the emergence of the real you, the one you are always becoming, the version that carries glory, carries calling, carries fire, the one that makes darkness nervous. This moment is holy, this hour is weighty. This is the unveiling hell tried to delay, and yet here you are, awakened, empowered, and ready. Chosen one. Do you know why everything around you feels like it's shifting? It's not because the world suddenly became gentler or your surroundings miraculously improved. The shift is happening because you became someone new. This is not the same version of you who entered this season feeling unworthy, uncertain, and unseen. And now, with only 24 hours left in this version of your life, have you taken a moment to truly recognize the divine authority that is already flowing through your spirit? Cycles don't vanish simply because you prayed harder or wished them away. They break because you stopped feeding them. The habits, relationships, and mindsets that once drained you cannot survive the atmosphere of who you are becoming. What if the only reason that chaos stayed so long was because a former version of you silently allowed it? What if the moment you awakened, everything that once bound you began to lose its grip? That's exactly what's happening. The old you tolerated toxic patterns and called it grace. You misread distractions and assumed they were blessings, chasing noise while your soul craved peace. But this new you, the one who sees with spiritual clarity, can sense manipulation before it speaks. You've developed a radar for traps wrapped in opportunities. You no longer chase crumbs, mistaking them for provision. You no longer apologize for your favor, your voice, or your vision. Because now you know you were never created to survive in dysfunction. You were chosen to disrupt it. This awakening isn't pride, it's precision. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. Think of Gideon. When the angel of the Lord appeared, Gideon saw himself as a nobody, the least in his family. Yet heaven addressed him as mighty warrior before he ever picked up a sword or led a battle. What changed the outcome wasn't the enemy growing weaker. It was Gideon beginning to believe who God said he was. The same is happening in you. The warfare didn't end because hell gave up. It ended because you stopped cooperating with it. Can you remember how long you stayed in places your spirit had already outgrown? How often did you silence your own voice just to maintain fragile peace? You tolerated jealousy, manipulation, and spiritual decay, all under the banner of love. But deep down, something always felt off. And perhaps the truth is this: heaven was never waiting for the circumstances to change. Heaven was waiting for you to grow into your identity. The delays weren't divine punishment, they were divine preparation. It wasn't that the enemy had more power, it was that you hadn't yet stepped fully into your awareness. But now, Now something irreversible has shifted. You've crossed a line in the spirit where pretending no longer fits and shrinking no longer serves. You've stepped into maturity, clarity, and deep spiritual identity, the one God wrote into your design long before you ever breathed your first breath. And here's a mystery most people miss. When identity rises, bondage weakens. When you finally see yourself through God's eyes, the chains that once held you forget how to tighten. Can you sense it? The strongholds that once had power over you no longer know how to respond. They've been trying the same tactics, but nothing sticks because you're no longer who you were when the war began. The old you hesitated. The old you begged for approval. The old you tried to earn your place. But the awakened you? You've become spiritually dangerous. You now walk in authority that commands respect in realms both seen and unseen. What would you do differently if you only had 24 hours left in this old skin? What would you release from your heart? What toxic bond would you break once and for all? What lie would you stop carrying? These aren't just questions, they're invitations, because today marks the unraveling of every battle that gained strength from the version of you that is no longer here. And this new version, the one heaven has been waiting on, you just stepped into it. And the enemy is panicking, not because you're fighting harder, but because you've become someone their old weapons can no longer reach. Chosen one, what you're about to hear isn't just meant to stir your emotions. It's meant to reconstruct your entire inner world. This isn't just inspiration, this is divine recalibration. If this were truly your last 24 hours in the season that's been stretching you, pressing you, purifying you, would you still give permission to thoughts that keep you small? Would fear still have a seat at the table, whispering doubts as if it belongs in your decision-making? You see, your tomorrow isn't tied to a date on a calendar. It isn't waiting for the clock to strike midnight. Your true tomorrow begins the moment you agree with how heaven already sees you. There was a time when I misunderstood this. I used to think breakthrough would come when circumstances changed, when apologies were finally spoken, when wounds were acknowledged, when people returned or storms passed. I thought that when life became quiet, healing would naturally follow. But nothing truly shifted in me until my thoughts did. There was a moment, after betrayal had left me numb, after silence made me question my worth, and after confusion clouded everything I thought I knew, when I looked into the mirror and realized I am not the product of my pain. I am the reflection of God's promise. That realization didn't happen in a sanctuary. It didn't come with fanfare. It was quiet, almost hidden. But that moment was my true tomorrow, the day I stopped defining myself by trauma and began identifying with truth. And chosen one, I know that moment is coming for you, if it hasn't already arrived. When it does, everything changes. Jesus spoke a truth in the Gospel of John that pierces deeper than any sword. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. He didn't say freedom waits on a rescue or that liberation comes from people treating you better. He didn't tie freedom to environment, relationship status, or public applause. He tied it to truth, because once truth enters, chains don't even need to be shattered. They simply slip off, powerless. That truth rocked me, because I realized God wasn't delaying anything. He wasn't holding out on me. He was waiting for me to wake up, not to what was around me, but to what was within me. That's what He's doing in your life too, chosen one. He's crafting an internal elevation before an external one ever appears. Because what's the use of new territory if you carry the old fear with you into it? Why arrive at the promised land with a wilderness mindset still muttering inside you? That's why God didn't ignore your wounds. He exposed them, not to humiliate, but to heal. That's why He pulled you into isolation, not as punishment, but as preparation. Just as He led Moses to the backside of the desert before ever calling him to confront Pharaoh, He has been reintroducing you to yourself. You had to see that you're not fragile, you're forged, you're not broken, you're blessed, you're not weak, you're walking proof of divine anointing. God had to confront the internal narratives that clipped your wings long before you even tried to fly. The voices that told you you were too late, too much, or not enough. He's silencing them now, because your soul was never meant to live under a ceiling that trauma built. And when I finally let truth settle deep into my spirit, not just as theory, but as identity, everything shifted. My language shifted. I no longer prayed out of desperation, but from authority. My posture changed. I stood taller, spiritually and emotionally. I began to walk as if I had already been confirmed by heaven. And that's when I knew I would never be the same again. So let me ask you this, chosen one, if this truly were your final 24 hours in this season, how would you treat yourself differently? What thoughts would you stop inviting in like unworthy guests? What inner lies would you finally evict with the authority God has given you? If freedom is waiting on your agreement, not your timeline, what would you say yes to right now? I believe the shift is already happening. Even as you listen to these words, something inside you is awakening. Something sacred is breaking free. Not because of the date, not because of the hour, but because you've stopped agreeing with the lies and started aligning with truth. And once you do that, chosen one, there's no turning back. Only forward, only higher, only deeper into who you were always created to be. What if everything you've been waiting for could change in the next 24 hours? Not because the world outside you suddenly shifted, but because your inner world finally aligned. What if your greatest breakthrough wasn't about timing, but about thinking? What if today marked the final day you lived like a survivor and the first day you walked like royalty? Chosen one, how many doors have stayed closed? Not because they were locked, but because your thoughts refused to reach for the handle? Have you ever wondered how much of your destiny has been quietly waiting for your mindset to catch up with your calling? You are stepping into a space where fear no longer speaks your language, where shame no longer has access to your identity, and where darkness no longer negotiates with your mind. Because when your thoughts come into agreement with heaven, your entire reality begins to bend in response. Mountains start to move, not because you pushed harder, but because you believed deeper. This moment, this final stretch of your current season, has never been about the seconds ticking by. It's not about the hands on the clock. It's about spiritual synchronization. When God speaks of tomorrow, He is not limited by your calendar. He is speaking of transformation, a shift so internal, so holy, that it redefines what's possible around you. Think of the Israelites standing at the edge of the Red Sea. It wasn't the next sunrise that parted the waters. It was their obedience to move when logic said stay still. It was their trust in a God who makes a way where there is no way. And when Joshua marched around Jericho, it wasn't the repetition that caused the walls to fall. It was the faith that crescendoed until heaven answered with thunder. Could it be that your breakthrough isn't 24 hours away, but one surrendered thought away? Consider Joseph. He didn't wake up knowing his prison sentence was ending, but when Pharaoh sent for him, he was ready. He shaved, he dressed with dignity, he carried wisdom birthed through years of betrayal and waiting. And in a single day, he went from the pit to the palace, not because the stars aligned, but because he was prepared when destiny called. What if today is your preparation for a tomorrow that exceeds your imagination? Would you still play it safe? Would you still hide behind false humility? We've seen this same pattern in real life, even if the names aren't always loud. Take Inky Johnson, a young man destined for the NFL, whose career-ending injury shattered everything on the surface. But instead of collapsing, he shifted his mind. He embraced his pain, found purpose in his suffering, and now speaks life into millions. His external dream ended, but his internal calling awakened. Or consider Lisa Nichols, once a struggling single mum on public assistance with barely $12 to her name. It wasn't a financial miracle that changed her. It was when she changed her narrative. She stopped thinking like someone abandoned and began living like someone chosen. Today, she empowers others through her story, not because she was rescued, but because she renewed her mind. You were never created to tiptoe through life, whispering your gifts, apologizing for your radiance, or dimming your brilliance to avoid making others uncomfortable. These final hours are not survival mode. They are re-entry into your royal identity. You are returning to the rhythm of heaven, the posture of divine confidence, the reality where you walk like one sent. What would your voice sound like if you truly believed you were already victorious? What would your choices look like if you knew this was the last time you'd ever question your worth? This is more than the end of a chapter. It is a divine reset, a return to your original blueprint. From the beginning, you were created to walk with boldness, to speak with spiritual gravity, to move in prophetic timing, and to see yourself as God sees you, anointed, appointed, and equipped. This moment isn't just the conclusion of what held you back. It's the unveiling of a life where you stop apologizing for being chosen. Now that you're standing here at the edge of transition, what will you do differently, knowing time is no longer something you can afford to waste? Will you whisper or will you roar? Will you shrink or will you stand? The clock may still be ticking, but something in you has already crossed over. And the real question is, are you ready to live like your tomorrow already arrived? What if this was your final 24 hours living under the cloud of uncertainty, the last breath of a season that's felt like wandering in a fog, just before the light of clarity breaks over your life like sunrise after night of endless wrestling? Chosen one, have you ever considered that what you thought was God's denial was really His delay, crafted not to frustrate you, but to form you? The dreams you thought were ignored, the prayers you assumed were lost, the moments you felt invisible. What if they were never missed by heaven, but were simply reserved for the version of you strong enough to carry them? I've walked through those hollow feeling seasons, the ones where silence from God felt like rejection, where your tears fell like seeds on dry ground and nothing seemed to grow, where you held on to faith not because you felt strong, but because it was the only thing you had left. And yet now, looking back, I see those seasons weren't empty. They were sacred. God wasn't punishing me, He was preparing me. He wasn't ignoring me. He was transforming me. And chosen one, I believe with everything in me that this is exactly what He's doing in you. Heaven has been crafting the architecture of your tomorrow long before you even found the courage to pray for it. You were weeping for healing, not realizing you were being shaped into a vessel of healing for others. You were crying for an open door, never imagining you'd become the open door that others walk through. Isn't it mysterious and even beautiful how the very things we assumed were breaking us were actually birthing us? Think of David, tending sheep in fields no one saw, overlooked by even his own father when the prophet came looking for a king. And yet, it was in those hidden places that kingship was being formed. His hands learned to defend the flock. His heart learned how to worship in solitude. And when the time came, he didn't need to audition. He had already been anointed. Could it be that you too have been quietly anointed in your unseen place, and now your moment is drawing near? Take the real-life story of Sarah Jakes Roberts. The world saw her as the daughter of a famous preacher, a teen mom, a woman whose early mistakes seemed to disqualify her. But what the world didn't see was how she let God rebuild her, silently, in the dark, with tears no one applauded. And now, she walks in a global ministry, not because she was lucky, but because she was prepared. Her past didn't bury her, it birthed her platform. Or consider Chris Carr, diagnosed with an incurable cancer at just 31. Most would have surrendered, but she changed her mind before her circumstances changed. She turned her pain into purpose, becoming a wellness advocate, best-selling author, and a source of light for thousands. She didn't wait for healing to feel whole. She aligned her identity with who she was becoming, not what she was facing. Jeremiah 29 tells us that God has plans to prosper us, not to harm us, but to give us hope and a future. And here's something that rewired my spirit. Your future isn't something you randomly stumble into. It's something that recognizes your name the moment you're ready to carry it. That means your maturity carries weight. Your transformation makes a sound that heaven responds to. When your identity aligns with God's design, your future has no choice but to open wide. I remember begging God for clarity. I was tangled in disappointment, aching for an answer, longing for direction. But God didn't give me a dramatic revelation. He gave me silence, and in that silence, I was reconstructed, piece by sacred piece. Until one day, the silence broke, not with fireworks, but with a whisper so tender it shook my soul. Clarity didn't arrive because enough time had passed. It came because I had passed through the furnace of transformation and emerged prepared. So now, I gently ask you, chosen one, if this truly is the final 24 hours of your current season, which version of yourself will you choose to honor? Will you cling to the old narrative, the one that questioned your worth, doubted your strength, and feared your own power? Or will you embrace the version of you that was built in fire, shaped in silence, and strengthened in the shadows? Because you're not just stepping into a new season, you are stepping into the fulfillment of everything that once tried to destroy you. You'll speak with a holy authority that changes rooms. You'll walk with a peace that quiets storms. You'll be the answer to the prayers others haven't even dared to speak yet. The future you once begged for, it's now becoming the present you're finally ready to receive. The enemy mistook your delay as weakness, but it was really the womb of your rising. And now, chosen one, if you knew, deep in your bones, that today was the last day you'd ever walk in the shadows, how would you show up in the light? Chosen one, let me tell you something few dare to say out loud. You're not being punished, you're being positioned. This wilderness you've walked through wasn't God's silence, it was God's surgery. And while the world around you may still be waiting for physical evidence of your breakthrough, heaven already sees the shift. You've changed, not just in how you think, but in what you tolerate, what you believe, what you carry in your atmosphere. You no longer cry the same way. You no longer pray as a beggar. You pray as one who knows you've already been heard. Think of Ruth. She lost everything: her husband, her homeland, her status. Yet in the ashes of her grief, she made one decision that changed the course of eternity. "Your God will be my God," she told Naomi, and followed her into the unknown. That single moment of surrender placed her in the lineage of Christ. What if your next step, though it feels small, is actually the turning point of generations? What if your obedience in obscurity is writing history in heaven? There's something sacred about those who stay faithful even when nothing looks fruitful. I think of Brandon Leake, the spoken word artist who won America's Got Talent after years of performing to almost empty rooms. Before the lights and the cameras, there was just him, his voice, and a deep inner conviction that his words mattered. His gift didn't change. The audience did. He didn't become powerful on stage. He was already powerful in secret, and so are you. Right now, you may feel like you're in a holding pattern, like heaven put you on pause while others pass you by. But don't let delay lie to you. God is not late. He's layering your strength. He's teaching you how to hold weight in the unseen, so when visibility comes, you won't collapse under the pressure of influence. David didn't become king when they crowned him. He became king when he chose worship over resentment in the fields. And maybe that's your hidden crown too, the fact that Even when life didn't make sense, you kept showing up with a pure heart. You kept praying even when you didn't feel power. You kept forgiving when bitterness would have felt easier. You kept believing even with no confirmation because something in your spirit refused to die. That something, that was God's breath inside you, refusing to let your destiny rot in disappointment. Can I ask you something, chosen one? If you knew the wait was almost over, how would you carry these final moments? Would you still question if you're good enough? Would you still agree with voices that were never qualified to speak into your life? Or would you start acting like someone who's already been approved by heaven? Because the truth is, you have been approved. You're not just a survivor, you're a divine disruptor. You've been trained in loneliness, baptized in fire, and now you walk with an authority that can't be faked. You are becoming the person the battle was always afraid of. That's why the resistance was so strong. That's why the silence was so long. Not because God abandoned you, but because He was anchoring you. So now the question is no longer, when will it happen? The question is, are you ready to carry it? And something tells me, yes, you are. Not because it's easy, but because you finally stopped trying to earn what you were always born to walk in. Chosen one, do you realize what's happening right now? You are standing in the holy collision between preparation and manifestation. This isn't just another day passing by. This is the culmination of every private battle, every quiet victory, every tear that never got applause. You've arrived at a threshold where your identity is no longer theory, it's revelation. You're becoming aware of who you've always been in heaven's eyes. And the moment you see it, everything around you will begin to respond. But here's the part most people miss. Your breakthrough doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it feels like peace instead of applause, like inner stillness instead of outer signs. That's how Elijah encountered God, not in the wind, not in the fire, but in a still, small voice. And that whisper is often where the greatest shifts happen, not because something exploded, but because something settled. You've lived long enough under the weight of pretending you were okay when you were really just surviving. But now you've come too far to keep wearing old masks. The version of you that once sought permission to shine is being replaced by a version that understands. You were never meant to blend in. You were always meant to lead, to awaken, to carry something the world desperately needs. Think of Esther. She was placed in a palace not for luxury, but for liberation. She wasn't crowned for comfort. She was crowned for confrontation. And it wasn't until she embraced who she truly was, for such a time as that she saved a nation. Can you feel it? Could this be your for such a time as this moment? Could everything you've walked through, every delay, every heartbreak, have been preparing you not just for a breakthrough, but for someone else's freedom too? Real life mirrors this truth. Look at Stephen Bartlett, a young entrepreneur who built a multi-million-dollar company from scratch after being rejected, dropped out of university, and laughed at. He didn't let the voices of doubt define him. Instead, he built his life on unshakable clarity, not because everything made sense, but because he knew who he was becoming and refused to let small minds shrink his vision. That's what you're doing too. You're not just rebuilding your life, you're reclaiming it. But this time, you're not begging doors to open. You're realizing you are the door, the access point, the blessing in motion, the answer to prayers you don't even know were spoken. And if you truly believed that, how would you carry yourself today? Would you still walk quietly through rooms that were meant to feel your presence? Would you still entertain relationships that insult your purpose? No, chosen one, this is your turning point. The edge where fear gets replaced with fire, where doubt gets replaced with destiny, where hiding gives way to holy confidence. Because this is no longer about surviving the storm. It's about realizing you are the storm, the shift, the sound that signals change. Let me say it plainly, you're not becoming powerful. You already are. The enemy knew it before you did. That's why you were attacked so early, so hard, and for so long. That's why you were isolated, misunderstood, underestimated. Because something in you carried weight before you had the words to name it. But now you're waking up, and once a chosen one awakens, there's no going back. The spiritual atmosphere recognizes the shift. Your voice sounds different now. Your presence feels different now. You no longer walk into rooms wondering if you belong. You walk in knowing the room shifted because you entered it. So what would you do right now, knowing this is the final chapter of your old self? What habit would you finally release? What lie would you finally correct? What decision have you been delaying because fear told you you're not ready? Let me tell you the truth. You are ready. You've been prepared in fire, formed in silence, trained in the unseen, and the world is about to meet the version of you that was worth the wait. Chosen one, if this truly is your final 24 hours in this season, the last stretch before the shift becomes visible, how you move now matters more than ever. Not because you're trying to earn your breakthrough, but because your breakthrough is trying to see if you're ready to carry its weight. Do you feel it? That stirring in your spirit? It's not anxiety, it's activation. Heaven is testing the tension in your faith, checking to see if the roots you planted in darkness can now hold fruit in the light. But don't misunderstand, this isn't about striving, it's about alignment. God isn't asking you to prove yourself, He's asking you to position yourself. Like Noah building an ark in the middle of drought, your obedience may not make sense to others. But what if the reason you've felt the pressure intensifying is because the rain is closer than you think? What if the reason this season feels heavier is because it's about to end? Do you remember Hannah? She cried out in bitterness of soul, misunderstood even by the priest, weeping year after year for a child she didn't have. But the moment came when she released the bitterness, and her cry turned into covenant. That final act of surrender ushered in her breakthrough. She gave birth to Samuel, not just a son, but a prophet who would shift the entire course of Israel. What if your current agony is not a delay? It's labor pains. What if your Samuel is already on the way? And let's be honest, there have been days you wanted to give up, days when you were tired of being strong, days when it felt like obedience cost too much, and yet you're still here. Do you realize how powerful that is? You kept walking through doors you didn't understand. You kept showing up when it felt like no one noticed. You kept praying when it looked like nothing was changing, but something was changing. You. It's the same quiet resilience that carried Howard Schultz, the man behind Starbucks. Born into poverty in a housing project, raised by a family with little hope, he had every reason to settle, but he carried a vision others didn't see. He was willing to sacrifice, to endure rejection, to keep building when the world said no. He wasn't simply creating coffee shops, he was building culture, and he did it because his internal shift came before the external success. That's the key, and that's where you are now. You're not standing in a waiting room, you're standing in a delivery room. Heaven isn't holding back on you. Heaven is waiting for you to hold yourself differently, to speak like you carry purpose, to walk like your steps are ordered, to forgive like the offense can't follow you into the next season, to dream like there are no limits, because there aren't. And the enemy knows this. That's why the warfare intensified right before the shift. That's why people began to fall away, why doors seemed to close, why voices you trusted turned silent. It wasn't a curse, it was a clearing. God didn't remove them to punish you. He removed them to protect your harvest. Not everyone is allowed to witness your next. Can I ask you a deeper question? If you truly knew this was the final 24 hours of your testing, would you still let fear narrate your future? Would you still play small to comfort those who've refused to grow? Or would you rise boldly and unapologetically into who you were always meant to be? You've been anointed for impact, chosen for influence, not the kind the world celebrates, but the kind heaven trusts. You are not just crossing into a new season, you are crossing into a new dimension of yourself. One where you no longer ask for permission to speak, to lead, to rise. One where you finally own your calling without shame, where you stop doubting whether you're ready and start realizing you were born for this. You are standing at the edge of something irreversible. What you do with this final day in this spiritual season will echo, not just in your life, but in the lives of everyone your obedience will touch. Because whether you see it or not, you are the breakthrough in someone else's story. And maybe, just maybe, that's why God couldn't let you quit. Chosen one, the reason this moment feels different, heavier, quieter, more sacred, is because it truly is. This is more than a countdown. This is spiritual closure. Not closure that requires apologies or neat endings, but the kind that comes when your spirit finally outgrows what once felt like home. You've reached the hour where you can no longer shrink back into who you were, not because someone told you to change, but because your spirit refuses to stay small. I remember reaching a moment like this once. I was sitting alone one night, staring at everything that hadn't worked out, relationships that ended without explanation, prayers that still seemed unanswered, dreams that had lost their spark. I felt exhausted, spiritually numb. I whispered, "God, I don't know what else to do." And I didn't hear thunder. I didn't feel fire. But what came next was almost imperceptible, a shift in how I saw myself. Not as someone God had forgotten, but as someone He was forming. That moment didn't erase my questions, but it anchored me. I suddenly knew I wasn't being punished. I was being prepared. And that's what I believe is happening to you now. You're being positioned, not for something small, but for something so weighty, so holy, that only pressure could build the capacity to hold it. Think of how Jesus healed, often with a simple word: get up, see, be made whole. He didn't always explain the process, because the power was in the activation. He spoke straight to the spirit of a person. And I believe He's doing that now with you. You don't need another sign. You need a shift in posture, a decision to believe that the wilderness didn't weaken you. It revealed the warrior within. The enemy hoped you'd stay exhausted, that you'd fall asleep spiritually right before everything changed. But here you are, still standing, still watching, still sensitive to the voice of God, and that is no small thing. You didn't quit when quitting would have been easy. You didn't numb out when silence got too loud. You leaned in, you waited, you became strong in the stillness. Let me share a story that moved me deeply. Soichiro Honda, the founder of Honda Motor Company, failed over and over. His factory was bombed in war. His early inventions were rejected, yet he didn't walk away. He rebuilt from the ground up with oil-stained hands and relentless hope. He wasn't lucky. He was mentally and spiritually transformed through disappointment. And that transformation gave birth to innovation. I saw so much of myself in that story, and I see you in it too. You've been building something invisible inside you, a new lens, a new language, a new identity. And now, even if the environment hasn't changed, you have. That's why I can't go back to the old version of myself, and neither can you. Once you've tasted clarity, confusion loses its grip. Once you've heard God whisper who you really are, every lie starts to sound like noise. You don't walk into rooms asking, "Am I worthy?" You walk in knowing, "I was sent." I think often about Joseph, forgotten in prison, falsely accused. But when Pharaoh called for him, Joseph didn't delay. He shaved, changed clothes, and came forward already dressed for destiny. He didn't wait for confirmation. He was the confirmation. And what about you, chosen one? What would shift if you treated this moment like the invitation you've been waiting for all along? This is your hour of sacred transition, not because the world said it's time, but because your spirit has already moved on. And if you really believed this was the final 24 hours of who you used to be, what would you do differently? Would you still explain yourself to people who never truly saw you? Would you still let insecurity narrate your calling? I've made the mistake of carrying old thoughts into new territory. It delayed my peace. It clouded my vision. But the moment I stopped needing others to recognize what God already confirmed, everything became clearer. And now I move quieter, but with more power. I speak less, but with more weight. And I believe that same authority is rising in you. So walk, chosen one, not as who you were, but as who you've become. The season is closing. The light is rising. The last 24 hours are here, not to scare you, but to prepare you to finally walk as the version of yourself that heaven has been waiting on. Chosen one, when God says you're down to the last 24 hours of this season, He's not talking about time the way the world counts it. He's talking about alignment, positioning, and final obedience. Heaven has been watching not just your actions, but your intentions, not just your strength, but your surrender. Because in these final moments of the season you're about to leave behind, God isn't asking for more hustle. He's asking for a holy decision. I remember a moment where I stood on the edge of something I couldn't explain. Doors weren't opening yet, but inside something was rumbling. I kept sensing, you're about to step into it, but only if you respond differently this time. That terrified me. What if I missed it? What if I stayed 1 foot in the old mindset while trying to reach for the new promise? And that's when I realized God wasn't waiting on my perfection. He was waiting on my agreement. I had to choose to end the season before the season ended me. Some of you reading this are exactly where I was. You've outgrown the wilderness, but you're still holding its language in your mouth. You're still using survival strategies in a land God now calls inheritance. But inheritance doesn't respond to effort. It responds to identity. Have you embraced who you've become, or are you still tiptoeing in rooms built for your authority? In Numbers 13, the 12 spies were sent into the promised land. 10 of them came back afraid, saying, "We were like grasshoppers in our own eyes." The land was already theirs, but their self-perception disqualified them. And this is the hour where you must ask yourself, are you walking like the season is ending, or are you still living like you're unworthy of what comes next? Look at Haley Moss, diagnosed with autism at a young age. People doubted if she would ever function independently, but she didn't let the labels define her future. She became Florida's first openly autistic attorney. Her mind didn't fit the mold the world expected, but it was exactly the shape God had in mind for her purpose. Her breakthrough didn't arrive when society approved her. It arrived when she stood fully in her God-given identity, despite the predictions. And that's what God is calling you into now. Not into the comfort of understanding, but into the boldness of becoming. This next realm isn't about proving anything. It's about revealing everything that's been formed in secret. Your long nights, your quiet healing, your unseen obedience. It was never wasted. It built something eternal in you. You are not crossing into a better version of yesterday. You are crossing into a completely new dimension of promise. And that dimension won't wait for you to feel ready. It responds the moment you say, "Yes, God, even if I'm scared, even if I've never been here before, I say yes." These final 24 hours in this season are a test, but not the kind you're used to. It's not testing how much you can endure. It's testing whether you'll let go of the identity that was only meant to carry you this far. Will you finally release the weight you've been carrying just to survive? Will you dare to see yourself as God sees you, even if that version of you terrifies the people around you? The shift you've been praying for may not come in lightning. It might come in your tone, your decisions, your silence, your stance. How you walk into this next room matters, not because it changes God's mind, but because it reveals that your mind has changed. Chosen one, don't be deceived by how quiet this moment feels. Heaven is roaring. The angels assigned to your purpose are already moving. Destiny is gathering itself around your name. And the only thing left to decide is, will you finish this season like someone who knows you're already crowned? Chosen one, here's what many don't realize. The final 24 hours of a spiritual season carry more power than some entire years of your life. Why? Because this is where the decision is made. Not the external decision to move, but the internal decision to let go. And that kind of release shakes things in the spirit. That's what causes angels to be dispatched. That's what makes God say, now they're ready. You might feel like nothing is moving around you right now, but trust me, something is moving in you, and that shift is louder in heaven than you can possibly imagine. Do you remember how Jesus told his disciples in John 12 that unless a seed falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit? That's the season you're in. This final hour is not death, it's resurrection preparation. And here's what I've learned in my own walk. Sometimes the most important part of a season isn't the victory at the end, but the quiet resolve not to go back. I've had moments where I knew I had spiritually outgrown something, but I still kept one foot in the familiar because it was safe, because it was known, because I didn't fully trust what was next. But nothing changed until I did, and the moment I finally let go of the narrative, the expectation, the fear, everything shifted. Not overnight, but undeniably. Peace came, clarity followed, provision aligned, all because I stopped trying to manage a season that had already expired. Let me ask you, what are you still managing that God is trying to close? What identity are you still rehearsing that no longer fits your anointing? What person, habit, mindset, or memory are you still carrying into a land where it cannot survive? In Genesis, we see how Lot's wife looked back on Sodom even as God was rescuing her. And in that glance, she turned to salt. It wasn't the city that destroyed her. It was the inability to let go of what God already left behind. Could it be that the greatest threat to your next season is not your enemy, but your attachment? Now, let's shift to something modern. Viola Davis, one of the greatest actors of our generation. She once shared that she didn't start becoming free until she stopped trying to be who others expected her to be. She had to let go of the polished image, the cultural silence, the roles that demanded her to shrink, and instead she told the truth. She wrote her memoir. She spoke about childhood trauma. And when she stepped fully into her authentic power, doors didn't just open. They flew off the hinges. What if that same explosive freedom is on the other side of you, no longer pretending to be okay, where you're not supposed to stay? These last hours of your spiritual season aren't about packing up. They're about rising up. This is when you stop apologizing for your obedience. This is when you stop seeking closure from people who can't comprehend your growth. This is when you stop dressing like the version of you that prayed for breakthrough and start walking like the version of you who is the breakthrough. Don't let the quietness of this hour deceive you. The heavens are thundering. Your angels are standing in attention. The enemy is unsettled because you didn't fold, you didn't return, you didn't shrink. And now you're walking out of the fire carrying something: revelation, identity, voice, oil. So I ask you again, not for emotion but for alignment, what are you finally willing to release before this season ends? What chapter will you stop rereading so God can hand you the next scroll? What inner vow will you shatter so your true voice can rise? You're not leaving empty-handed. You're leaving as someone who can never be who you were again. and that alone is evidence that the season did its work. Chosen one, this final stretch isn't a waiting room, it's a courtroom. Heaven is finalizing something concerning you, and the verdict is not based on how loud you worship, how many people cheered you on, or how many storms you've endured. It's based on one thing: have you become the version of you that matches the promise? Because the promise isn't delayed, it's just waiting for agreement. The last 24 hours of any spiritual season are the most sacred. This is where identity is sealed, where old agreements are cancelled, where the anointing shifts, not just from potential, but into release. And most people miss it. They become so focused on what they're leaving behind, they forget to open their hands to what God is trying to place in them. But you, chosen one, you're different. You've stayed present, you've stayed tender, and even with tired hands, you've kept them lifted. I once heard someone say, "The enemy doesn't fear your past. He fears your revelation." And that stuck with me, because once I realized that my delays weren't punishment, they were protection. I stopped mourning what didn't happen and started preparing for what still could. There was a time when I was obsessed with why certain doors didn't open for me, why certain people walked away, why nothing seemed to work even though I was doing all the right things. But what I couldn't see then was that God wasn't trying to frustrate me, He was trying to upgrade me. And upgrades require silence, isolation, and a willingness to stand still when your flesh wants to run. That's exactly where you are now, in the final 24 hours of this version of your story. And here's what many forget. When the Israelites crossed the Jordan, they crossed in silence. No shouting, no emotional display, just obedience, one step after another. And when they reached the other side, the waters closed behind them. The season was done. There was no going back. And I wonder, are you ready to cross over like that? Quietly, boldly, fully. Even in today's world, the principle remains. Look at Tiffany Montgomery, a bold voice in today's prophetic generation. She wasn't always known. She had her own wilderness, single motherhood, financial struggle, public battles. But when God called her out, it was because she had proven in private that she wouldn't bend under pressure. Her ministry now disrupts systems. Why? Because she didn't fake her process. She let the season shape her voice. So when her platform came, her oil had weight. And I believe the same will be true for you. God is giving weight to your voice. This next chapter won't require as much explaining. It will be marked by demonstration. People will no longer ask if you've changed. They'll feel it when you walk into the room. You won't have to prove anything. The fruit will speak for you. So, what final vow do you need to break before this season ends? What secret fear is still whispering to you as you prepare to rise? What false humility do you need to cast off so that your true confidence can finally breathe? I'll tell you from experience, what you carry now is too valuable to dilute. I used to downplay my calling to keep others comfortable. I called it kindness. God called it compromise. It wasn't until I let go of the need to be understood that I began to walk in true clarity. And you, chosen one, must do the same. Because these final 24 hours are where heaven takes inventory, not of your intentions, but of your decisions. You've been refined, tested, sharpened, and now, like a sword that's been in the fire long enough, you're ready to be drawn. Not for performance, but for purpose. Not for war, but for legacy. So, stand tall, breathe deep. Let go of what cannot cross with you. The waters are parting. The land is waiting. The season is closing, and heaven is watching. Will you walk like someone who knows you are the fulfillment of what your former self only dared to pray for? Chosen one, what if the final 24 hours of your season are not marked by noise, but by stillness so holy it can only be felt in the spirit? What if your last act in this chapter is not to run, fix, or chase, but simply to stand still and witness the shift? Because make no mistake, The shift is happening. It's not always loud. It doesn't always come with a trumpet blast, but it is sure. It is sealed, and it is spiritual. You may not feel it yet, but heaven is already responding to your surrender. The earth may not shake, but your inner landscape is transforming. God moves loudest in the silence of obedience. There was a time I thought God's movement always looked like elevation or acceleration, something visible, measurable. But now I know, sometimes the biggest move of God in your life is when you finally stop striving and start agreeing with who He says you are. And that's where you are, right now, at the precipice of something irreversible. Do you remember when Mary received the word from the angel that she would carry the Messiah? It happened in a private moment, in a quiet place, far from crowds or recognition. But that one moment changed history. She didn't need the public to confirm what heaven had already spoken. She simply said, "Let it be unto me according to your word." And that chosen one is the posture of this final hour. Not desperation, not confusion, just agreement. Because this season is not ending with noise. It's ending with authority. That's why you've been waking up with that strange stillness in your chest. That's why the old battles no longer tempt you to respond. That's why your spirit no longer reacts to what used to shake you. It's not numbness. It's maturity. It's not apathy. It's spiritual elevation. God has rewired your discernment, upgraded your emotional vocabulary, and taught you how to walk with unshakable inner knowing. Take Mo Isom Aiken, the former college soccer star who was being scouted for Olympic-level competition. Behind the scenes, she was walking through deep personal grief, battling suicidal thoughts, and wrestling with God's silence. But it was in the silence that He rebuilt her. Today, she's a bold prophetic voice, helping others walk through pain into purpose. Not because everything went according to plan, but because she surrendered her timeline for God's transformation. And that's what you're doing now, even if you don't fully realize it. These last 24 hours are not an ending, they are a birthing room. The contractions of the past season have pushed you to this edge. The grief, the betrayal, the silence, the delays, they were not a grave. They were a womb. And you are about to emerge carrying something that couldn't have been formed in any other way. So don't be surprised if things feel unfamiliar. Don't be shocked if old relationships fall silent or if certain opportunities suddenly vanish. That's not rejection, it's recalibration. God is removing anything that might suffocate your next. You've been called to carry something rare, and rare callings often require uncommon separation. I've experienced it myself. Those strange moments where people you thought would always be with you suddenly disappear. At first, it feels like loss, but eventually you realize it was protection. God was not being cruel. He was being precise. He was making room for what He knew you were about to become. So, chosen one, how will you carry yourself in these last hours? With fear or with reverence? Will you second-guess everything God showed you just because the world hasn't clapped yet? Or will you walk in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing heaven already wrote this moment into your scroll? You are not at the edge of ending, you are standing at the gate of release. And even if the trumpets don't blow, even if no one texts you, even if the environment still looks the same, you are not the same. And when you change, everything else has to. The final hour is here. Let it find you ready, not reactive, rooted, not restless, watching, not wondering. This is not the time to prove. This is the time to receive. Because in the realm of the Spirit, where it matters most, you've already crossed over. Chosen one, the last 24 hours of any divine season are never casual. They are prophetic. They are holy. They are heaven's way of finalizing what has been unfolding in the unseen for years. You may feel tired. You may feel quiet. You may even feel unsure. But don't mistake the stillness for stagnation. What you're standing in right now is not inactivity. It's a sacred transfer of authority. In the spirit realm, contracts are being closed. Old assignments are being lifted off your life. Soul ties that once kept you bound are being quietly severed by the hand of God. You don't have to fight them anymore. The war has already been decided in your favor. The battle you've been wrestling with for years, it lost access the moment you surrendered, not the moment you figured everything out. This is the hour where the oil begins to flow in places you didn't even know were dry. This is where spiritual inheritance that was once locked begins to unlock. Not because you earned it, but because you endured long enough to carry it without contaminating it. I remember facing a moment like this not too long ago. I had been praying for years about a promise that hadn't come to pass. I fasted, declared, waited, but nothing visibly changed. Then one night, without warning, I felt something lift. No voices, no vision, just a holy stillness. The kind that makes you feel like heaven just closed one chapter and opened another without needing your permission. In that moment, I knew something had shifted. Not outside, but within. I wasn't begging anymore. I was ready. That's what I believe is happening in you right now. Whether you feel it or not, the weight of the old is lifting. You've cried your final tears over what didn't work. You've mourned long enough for who left, what failed, and what fell apart. And now, chosen one, you are being summoned forward. Do you remember the story of Elijah and Elisha in 2 Kings chapter 2? Elisha followed Elijah from Gilgal to Bethel, from Bethel to Jericho, and finally to the Jordan. At every stop, Elijah gave him the chance to turn back. But Elisha refused. He said, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." And because of that persistent loyalty, not to Elijah but to his own prophetic assignment, Elisha received a double portion. But here's the part that moves me most. When Elijah was taken up into heaven, he dropped his mantle. Elisha didn't cry. He didn't delay. He picked it up. And I wonder, are you ready to pick up the mantle being dropped for you in this final hour? You've followed the fire. You've walked through the wilderness. You've been loyal to the word. And now, heaven is offering something more. Not more pressure, not more suffering, but more weight, more voice, more vision. But it's only given to those who can carry it in purity. Even now, I think of Wendy Bird, a former foster child who was told she'd never make it past 18. But she refused to let labels determine her life. She became a counselor, a life coach, and an advocate for children who grew up the way she did. She didn't just survive the season, she became the solution to others trapped in it. She turned her final 24 hours of pain into a lifetime of purpose. That is what you are stepping into now. The days of merely surviving are closing. The hours of hiding are over. This is the season where God doesn't just elevate you, He establishes you. Where your name is no longer just whispered in prayer rooms, but echoed in rooms of influence. Where the warfare that once tracked you now trembles when you rise. So, what would you do if you knew this was your coronation hour? Would you still doubt your voice? Would you still beg for what heaven has already confirmed? Would you still hesitate when God says, "Go"? You are no longer the version of you that began this journey. You've been baptized in fire, washed in tears, trained in silence, and now you carry kingdom. These last 24 hours are not just about stepping out, they're about stepping into your identity, your assignment, your authority. There is no delay anymore, there is only decision. There is no asking for the door to open. You are the door. Walk boldly, speak clearly, love fiercely, move prophetically. Because whether or not the world announces your arrival, heaven already has. Chosen one, if the pressure felt unbearable in this season, it's because you were carrying more than you realized. You weren't just walking through fire for yourself, you were paving the way for generations behind you. The weight, the warfare, the wounds, They weren't signs of failure. They were signs of the size of your assignment. This is why the attacks came so early, why you were targeted in childhood, why certain friendships were never stable, why you always felt just a little different, even in rooms where everyone smiled, because you weren't built for ordinary cycles. You were born for divine disruption. And now, in these final 24 hours, heaven is asking you to stop questioning why it was hard and start recognizing what it made you into. Do you remember Moses? The final night before the Israelites left Egypt was a night unlike any other. It was the hour of the Passover, the moment where obedience was life and hesitation was death. The people of God weren't just being released from a place, they were being launched into a promise. And that final night, when the blood marked their doorposts, was both judgment and protection. Heaven was closing one system and unlocking another. I believe you are in such a night. Spiritually speaking, this is your Passover. This is when the old bondage no longer has permission to follow you. This is when the blood of your obedience marks you for exit. Not just exit from a place, but from a mindset, a way of being, a version of yourself that only knew how to survive. Because the one rising now, that version of you, knows how to lead. I've walked through this kind of night before, quiet, heavy, almost hollow. A night where I knew something was ending, but I couldn't explain it to anyone. A night where nothing dramatic happened in the natural, but I knew in my spirit. This is the last time I will cry over this. This is the last time I will lower myself to be understood. This is the last time I carry this weight alone. And it was. I didn't feel instantly different the next morning, but within days doors began to open. My voice grew bolder. The fog lifted, because heaven had honored what I chose to leave behind in the final hour. This is your moment too. Think of Jesus in Gethsemane. The garden didn't just precede the cross, it separated the willing from the wavering. He said, "Not my will, but yours be done." And in that one sentence, eternity shifted. He crossed a line, not visibly, but spiritually. And once he crossed it, the arrest came, the betrayal came, the crucifixion came, but so did the resurrection. Sometimes the final test of a season is whether you can say yes to God when the next steps are still invisible. And what if that's exactly where you are? Even in our time, we've seen it. Zhang Yiming, the founder of TikTok, created something no one believed in at first. He was mocked, blocked, rejected, but in the hidden hours, when no one was applauding, he built anyway. Not because he had proof it would work, but because he sensed it was the right time. The world didn't see the cost, only the result. But you, chosen one, you know both. And that's what qualifies you for this next move. So now, let me ask you, in these final 24 hours of this spiritual chapter, what are you refusing to carry into the next? What pain have you nurtured long enough? What excuses have you rehearsed so many times they feel like identity? What fear is still whispering in the corners of your mind? Because the next version of you cannot be built on the trauma of your last battle. It must be built on the wisdom of what you've survived. You've cried enough. You've waited enough. You've proven your loyalty to the process. And now the question is not, will it happen? The question is, will you walk into it fully aware that it already has? This season wasn't about punishment. It was about proving that you are no longer who you used to be. The delay wasn't denial. It was a spiritual induction ceremony meant to prepare you for the throne you didn't even know you were born to sit on. And now, chosen one, as heaven prepares to announce your transition, the only thing left to say is, don't look back, not even once. There's nothing behind you that compares to what's about to be unlocked in front of you. Chosen one, if you've made it to this moment, I want you to pause and let it settle in your spirit. You've come to the end of a sacred season, and you are not leaving it the same. This wasn't just another stretch of time. This was the wilderness that shaped you, the silence that matured you, the pain that purified you, and the fire that refined you. And now, with only hours left in this chapter, heaven is watching how you walk out of it. This final stretch may not come with fanfare. There might not be a trumpet blast, a viral moment, or a clear sign, but you'll know it deep inside, because peace will whisper where fear used to scream. And in that stillness, God will confirm, it is finished. You are ready. In today's world, we are surrounded by noise, distraction, pressure, comparison. But this message, this moment, is an invitation to step out of survival mode and into spiritual clarity. Because when you finally realize who you are in God, the things that once kept you stuck can no longer hold you. I speak this from my own journey. There were times I didn't know if I'd make it through the season I was in, times when I doubted the calling, the promise, even my own strength. But the moment I stopped trying to understand everything and simply agreed with what heaven had already said about me, everything changed. The peace came, the doors opened, and I knew the shift didn't happen because I earned it. It happened because I surrendered. So, chosen one, how will you finish these last 24 hours? Will you walk like someone still begging for answers? Or will you move like someone who knows the old season no longer has access to your name? If this message touched your spirit, let me know in the comments. I want to hear from you. Type, "I'm ready," or "I'm crossing over" below if you feel this word was confirmation. And if you haven't already, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and join this growing family of chosen ones rising all across the world. Don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who needs this message before their 24 hours are up. And to those of you who have supported through super thanks, left a kind word, or simply sat quietly with these messages in your heart, I see you. Thank you. Truly, you're not just viewers. You're part of a movement. You're part of a remnant. May the final hours of this season be filled with clarity, courage, and holy closure. And may the first moments of your next be filled with authority, alignment, and anointing. The season ends now. You rise next. God bless you, chosen one. The best is no longer coming. It's already knocking.